Welcome, everybody, to the Aaron's High Cabin Adventure Radio program. Tons of respect going on here with Super Attorney Rick Dodds sitting to my left. Rick, how you doing,
Respect for
buddy?
you. I'm doing great. I'm about done with eating pecan pies and all the Christmas stuff. Did you have a good Christmas this year?
I had a fantastic Christmas. I didn't get any coal, but I heard you got some special things. Why don't you tell us what's going on with your Christmas?
Oh
holiday?
yeah, I've got a nephew. He and I used to go hunting and fishing a whole lot. We'd kill ducks and dove, and we'd catch fish out of the river and cook them right there on the bank. And he really appreciated all that. He got older, and went off to school and got himself a degree in petroleum engineering, and got hired by Shell, and got sent down to South America. But he appreciates all the stuff he and I did together, so he always sends me a great Christmas present.
Okay, you got us waiting with bated breath here. What did he give you?
Well, I mean, this year he sent me a live bird. It was a green bird, had a yellow head and a little blue dot up there. And I tell you something about that bird, Matt. He was delicious. So my nephew calls me last week and he asked me if I got the bird, and I said, yeah, he was delicious. And he got upset about it. And it's like, well, I didn't know why he got upset. He said, well, that bird was expensive. He cost a lot of money. And he was worth it because he could speak 2 languages. And I said, well, he should have said something.
All right, Rick.
It's a true story.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you had a good Christmas, and I'm glad your stomach was full.
Yeah, man. It was a great Christmas.
Let's get to let's get to business here. I sent you a text about a headline I read and what I know to be in the news, and it's Washington State bans anyone under 21 from buying assault rifles. And I'm reading through the article and seeing what's going on, and what's the date? It says effective. Starting today, young adults between the ages of 18 and 20 will have their rights to purchase semi-automatic rifles stripped away. Okay, so I want to talk about that, and there's a lot of other things.
Now, of course, just to make sure we understand, we're talking about Seattle, Washington here, not Washington, D.C.,
Right.
And not the federal government. This is a states' rights issue.
States'
But
rights.
go ahead.
And it has to do with all the school shootings and all this kind of stuff. People were up in arms, quote unquote.
Except for the 20-year-olds.
Okay, right. And what's happening is you could buy a long gun. Didn't matter if it was a what they call an assault rifle, a shotgun, or a rifle. Doesn't matter. You could buy it when you're 18 years of age. Okay, but now they're saying no. We're going to jump it up to 21 for assault rifles, being like M4s, AKs, things of that nature. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, and one part of me says, the maturity level, sure, but who am I to take away a right of somebody when they're at legal age at 18?
Well, your right is to vote for a legislator that you feel is or isn't going to do what you
Right.
do or do not want.
And that's the problem. It was voted in through the process, so I'm stuck with it. However, which kind of makes me look at the people who are opposed against it. Why didn't we stand up and speak more about it and somehow get it where it wouldn't have this happen and people would have their rights when they're 18? But because it has happened, you got to obey the law. But I want to talk about it and see what Rick has to say when it comes to it constitutionally, if there's anything going wrong with it constitutionally, or can they do what they're doing because it is state rights. And so I'm all over the place here, Rick, because I don't know.
Well,
100%
I
of the
appreciate
answers.
that because there are arguments all over the place with regard to the Second Amendment in the first place. How is it interpreted, and do we have an absolute constitutional right to carry guns? I think you had a segment on that a couple of weeks ago where we talked about that. So the Constitution is a document and it says what it says, okay? So the trouble is that people read what it says and have different ideas about what it means, even though the words are the same. So everybody talks about states' rights, and of course that's in the Constitution too. So allowing the state of Washington to make this ban is then sent up through the court system because there are going to be people that challenge this law and organizations that challenge this law. So then it's going to eventually land in front of the Supreme Court. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court of the United States insofar as how they might or might not deal with this issue.
Look, let me ask something real quick for clarity purposes for myself and for others. In the Constitution, in the Second Amendment, it says your rights to bear arms shall not be infringed. The state looks at it and says, okay, we're not going to infringe your right to own it. We're just going to tell you how you get to own it. Is that how the state right comes into play?
Right, right. Because, well, you know, and of course, you didn't read the whole Second Amendment. It talks about the militia. So, you know, there's interpretations that say, well, you know, it's not an absolute right only if you're in a militia. So, the whether or not there's a constitutional ban on or ability for states to make that constitutional ban will be the question. Because the Supreme Court of the United States is not going to allow any one state to infringe on any minority or, you know, some people who don't have the majority vote constitutional rights. So the question is where do you draw the line? Does an infant have the right to go buy guns? And right now we say no. So we have arbitrarily placed the line at 18 years of age, and some of the states, and not just Washington, but several states, and by the way, our president supports this law, wants to move it to 21. So what we look at when we're looking at the laws and how they might conflict with some interpretations of the Constitution is whether or not the government's duties, whether or not what the government is trying to take care of has a relationship to the law. Some of the cases that we look at to figure that out, one of the seminal cases is the Craig case, and it had to do with alcohol. And there was a state that tried to say, well, we're going to allow people that are females under the age of 21, from 18 to 21, we're going to allow them to drink beer that is less than 3.2% alcohol, but we're not going to let males. And the reason is because males are somewhere around 20 times more likely to get arrested for DWI, so they were trying to show that their purpose of the law was related to the law itself. And this was determined and primarily because of sex is a protected class, if you may, for discrimination. This was allowed to be, it was said to be unconstitutional because it unfairly used maleness as its factor. And even though males were 2% more likely to get caught with drunk driving in that age group, females were 0.18, the Supreme Court says, well, we don't want to use just that factor. So the correlation to the trait and the behavior was there, but there really wasn't a correlation with regard to how many miles the males might be driving, how many hours they were behind the wheel, and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So even though there was an attempt to correlate the law with the purpose of the government, it didn't pass muster. Now, with regard to shootings, what we have here is, for instance, in 2014, there were over 21,000 people under 21 who were shot by guns. And even though we don't have any FBI records about who was arrested, and back to those deaths, about 2,000 of those were homicides and 1,000 of those were suicides.
But those are people receiving the gunshots who were 21 or under.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, homicides and suicides, right. But the suicides, of course, were those who had guns who shot themselves. And it kind of goes back to the concept of, well, when you're less than 21 years old, your thought patterns are not fully developed, your brain's not fully developed. I mean, we know that from neuroscience. And then you have these issues of, where I fit in society and where I'm going to be going, because it's an uncertain time of your life. So a big part of maturity comes somewhere in there, and we've arbitrarily set that at 21 years of old for drinking. But we still have 18 years old for voting. If you remember back in Vietnam, you know, the big mantra for all of us was, if we can go carry a gun around and kill other people in a war, we ought to be able to vote for those who make the decisions as to where we're going to go to war and how bad the war is going to be. So when we look at that, we could say the same thing here. It's like, well, if I can be drafted, or if I can go to the Army and go somewhere and carry a long rifle around, why couldn't I go buy one?
And just to make a comment, this law in Washington State, I believe, has that implemented, where if you're a service member that's under 21, you still can buy the weapon. So I don't want to.
And I also think it has something where if you have a hunting license.
Maybe so, if you go through a hunter safety course or something like that.
Yeah, so
there's some
then you might
exceptions.
beg the question, and of course I'm talking about the scrutiny here. You might beg the question, well, what if I'm a skeet shooter? Because I know kids who go to college and they're in the pistol club and the rifle club, and they win, trophies and gold medals for being great shots. So wouldn't their constitutional rights be offended by this new law? And, they're citizens, they can vote. So therefore, their constitutional right might be infringed. So what we go back to, though, when the Supreme Court looks at this, there are three areas that they can use, and one of them is the rational basis of that connection, the connection between what the government's trying to do and what the realities are, or the studies show. The rational basis is what's being used now. Now, Clarence Thomas has told us in a dissenting opinion some time back with regard to the Second Amendment that he felt like there should be a intermediate scrutiny. And then there's a whole lot of people who say there should be a strict scrutiny. And of course, strict scrutiny being the highest level of scrutiny with regard to whether or not these laws can be found unconstitutional. Clarence Thomas says, well, at least there ought to be an intermediate scrutiny. Well, right now they're using a rational basis. So you look at this arbitrary setting for 18, you look at an arbitrary setting for 21, you look at a lot of arbitrary settings. I mean, for instance, what if I wanted to buy a little atomic bomb? And, right now I can get those things set up in a suitcase and I can carry them around. So therefore, I should be able to keep and bear that arm. And, if I want to take it even a step further, why not get me a couple of Scud missiles and mount them on top of a semi and let me, bear them that way? Well, I think most all of us, there may be a few dissenters that would think that's ridiculous. Right now, there are laws against certain guns. I can't carry around a shotgun that's less than a certain length. I can't carry around a fully automatic weapon unless I have special license. And all those laws have been determined to be constitutional because the scrutiny of the law allows them, because it complies with what the government's trying to do, and that is to protect the citizens. Because, right now the FBI data shows that people who are 18 to 24 are disproportionately arrested for firearm-related crimes. In other words, they disproportionately have firearms and use them either for illegal purposes or they have an illegal firearm and therefore they're arrested. So you got to be looking at that sort of thing when you're talking about this rational basis of whether or not this law fits within our constitutional realm.
It gets very complex, right?
Well, it is, and no case goes in front of the Supreme Court of the United States that is not very complex. Because the time it gets there, we've already gone through a federal judge who probably has many, many years in the experience in the law practice. It goes through the Circuit Court of Appeals, where 9 judges look at it, and of course they all write their opinions. And if the Supreme Court of the United States sees that there's really no question for them to determine, in other words, that it's not very complex, they don't even look at it anymore. And our precedent makes us go back to those cases where the judge in the lower court or the appellate court makes the decision, say, well, when we make an argument in front of a new judge, well, here is the law. So only the complex cases go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Otherwise, they're buried as it is, but otherwise it would just be unbelievable chaos.
As much as I'm not into them increasing the age for one reason, I agree with it in another reason, but the bottom line always comes down to me on this. And like you're discussing, if it's constitutional now, does the state have the right to do that? And what you're doing and what you're explaining is that they do have the right to do that. and the people of that particular state have voted that way within that state. And it's almost like, if you didn't like it, you should have stood up and said something a little bit louder or voted a little bit more.
Yeah, like my bird. He should have said something.
In two different languages. Okay, what else we got?
Well, and we do have advocates out there who will challenge this law and try to, convince Judge Thomas and the rest of the folks up there that this is an unconstitutional law. So there will be firm law on it. Now, the problem is when you take a case like this that has pretty good connections with what the government's trying to do, protect the citizens, and you have a pretty good majority of the people who believe that this is a good idea. You have a president that believes that this is a good idea. You take this up to the Supreme Court and you get hammered. And suddenly your position no longer has any legal bearing. In other words, you just got shafted because you were so adamant that there's something wrong with this law. That's something that us lawyers have to look at all the time when we decide whether we're going to appeal a case up. Now, on the one hand, we have a duty to our client, of course, but in cases where you're looking at unconstitutional law, you got to make some decisions. And, I've said all along that I'm a big hunter. I enjoy hunting, and I have lots of guns for hunting. But somewhere in there's going to be a tipping point, in my opinion, where the folks in America are going to say enough is enough. School shootings with military-type weapons. Again, this has been found to be unconstitutional because of what's the definition of military-type weapons. But of course, this little Washington State issue has some nice photos here of military-style weapons, and I think every single one of those would fit the definition if you really were trying to define it. Like one justice on the Supreme Court says, well, I don't know the definition of porn, but I know it when I see it, right? So I know it when I see it. These are military-type weapons. And my point is that somewhere there will be a tipping point where my rights as a hunter are going to be infringed because people are going to vote to amend the Second Amendment. So again, this is my opinion, Matt, and I know you probably have a different opinion about this, but somewhere we got to be smart about how we allow some regulations. And I don't know that making this 21 is a bad idea, okay? Because when you look at the statistics, to me, it's pretty clear that it fits the purpose of the government, and that is to protect our citizens. And not just me and you, but the person who's 18, 19, and 20. And they can go take this little course where, you learn not to point the gun at anybody and learn that whenever you're going to shoot something that you've got a target. A lot of same stuff that you teach. It's not a complicated course. If they go do that, then they can buy these guns.
Rick, here's my rub on it. I don't think it has much to do with the type of firearm that it is. I really don't, because you can get a 10-22 rifle and trick it up to make it look like one of these, and it does the same thing. My rub is we have a problem out there, and the problem is mental. We have a mental problem out there. Not only do we have a breakup of the families where people who have access to guns for whatever reason don't know how to handle it because they weren't trained growing up, but we've got a lot of mushheads out there who are depressed or are losers or whatever it is, or disgruntled, or on drugs, whatever you want to call it. They have a mental deficiency of acting normal in society. And the other big factor, and you can't argue this, news agencies want ratings, and they promote it, and it continues to cycle because the people, these whack jobs, have a platform to show them. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a call. Let's see who we got on the line. Here we go. Welcome to the Aaron's High Cap Adventure Radio program. You're on the air. Who are we talking to? Hello. All right, we'll get back to you in a second.
So we talked a little bit about some of this as far as the news people go, and how you can use your platform, whatever platform that is, to be convincing.
Okay, I think we got it this time. Luke, go ahead, put them on. Welcome to the show. This is Matt. Who am I talking to?
Hey, Matt, this is Mark.
Hey, brother.
I love the show today. It's so informative. It's brilliant. And somebody was just saying something about going and getting trained for the weapons when they make the purchase. But I wanted to say that, more people are killed with cars every year, and they have to go and get licensed for this. The young people especially, have to go into driver's training and education. Well, what if we make it to where they need to go to a weapons safety course and actually have a certificate like they do a license to go and make that purchase? I think that's a really great idea. That way they're properly trained, and then they can be monitored.
Well, Mark, I'll make my rebuttal to that, and that is, although it may be a good idea, I'll be contrary to my belief that then puts a requirement on a right. To get a gun, I got to go through a course. Now, don't get me wrong. You know how I think. Everybody needs to train with a weapon. But then I become a hypocrite. I become a hypocrite if I say, well, your constitutional right says you get to bear arms. You can go and buy your weapon, okay, as long as you're not a criminal, and or what other problems are. But before you can buy the gun, you have to take a course. It's different like on driving, because driving's not a right. Driving is a privilege. So on something like that, they could put more restrictions on it. That's my initial comment on it. Rick, I know you got a comment on it. Tell me what you think.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to ask yourself, Mark, what is the difference between a law and a regulation? Well, there really is no difference, except the person who's saying it, he's going to say regulation if he doesn't like it, and the person who likes it is going to say it's a law. It's kind of like the spokesman here for the Second Amendment Foundation says they're going to strip their rights away, as opposed to they're going to protect the public by banning 18, 19, 20-year-olds from buying these guns. So my point is that if we like the regulations, you're talking about the killed, people getting killed in car wrecks. We like the regulations where there is a certain speed limit on the highway. And we like it when we can drive as fast as is safe, but we don't like it when people break that law and pass us. If we took those regulations away, and while we're at it, go ahead and take, say, the regulation away for being a doctor, and while we're at it, let's go ahead and take the regulations away for being a mortician. And man, just think of all the jobs that we would create. And I could, set up a little doctor's shop next to the freeway, and then put a mortician place next to it, and it would just be, it'd be great. We could just all make a bunch of money that way.
The other thing too, I would say, is we also have that First Amendment right, and that is, I've said this many times too, embarrass the person who is doing something stupid into submission. That's your right. You can show them and tell them and talk to them and maybe embarrass them into submission to doing the right thing. But I don't know, Mark. I want everybody trained, and I want them to come to me to get the training. But I don't know. I think I'd become a hypocrite if I were to do that.
Well,
that's what I love about this show. I always learn something new, and it opens my mind. So thanks for being so damn informative and brilliant. You're spot on, and that's all I got. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks. So Mark, like I said, though, that little shooting course, the hunting license course that you have to take these days if you're going to get a license. Fortunately for me, I was too old, but I went ahead and took it anyway, so I could go to Colorado hunting. And, it was elementary to me because I had a dad who took me out with a gun. When I was like 8 years old, he gave me a single-shot .22. Well, I had a different upbringing. So there's a whole lot of kids out there that really don't know the business end of a gun and what it can do. And they've never seen an animal shot with a 243 and the kind of hole it can. So they have no appreciation. So even though it's an elementary hunting license course, it still teaches some basic safety stuff that a lot of kids just don't get at all unless they do that. So the concept of stopping this 18 to 21-year-old buying guns and allowing them to do that if they take this hunter safety course and get a hunting license, that's sounds to me like a pretty good idea, even though it may be unconstitutional.
It goes back and forth. There's so many different ways. It's like Mark's saying about the gun training. It's almost like a mandatory thing. You need to do that. The hunter safety. It sounds like a mandatory thing. You need to do that. But does that it doesn't restrict me from buying the gun, I guess. I don't know how that works. Everything's so intertwined and crazy. I can't keep up with it all. You can buy the gun to go hunting, But before you can go hunting, you got to take the course so you can use the gun. I don't know how that applies, but when it comes to buying the gun, if you can't get the gun without the safety course, then that's a restriction on your right. So it's muddled, it's confusing. That's why I got you on, Rick.
Well, you know, there's a lot of those regulations out there that really do protect us, and I appreciate almost all of them.
Look, it makes total sense for hunter safety. Total sense. Because I've seen people who've gone through hunter safety who still put and try to cross fences with a loaded weapon in the fire position. I mean, you just don't do stuff like that. Or they're shooting across highways and they're shooting across people's property lines and all this kind of stuff. So there are definite benefits to it. It's the same thing like Mark's saying with the training. I can see people who get guns who don't know what the heck they're doing with a firearm. And that's why I'm such a jerk almost in my class when it comes to safety. It's like, if you're going to go carry this firearm out there, you've got to be responsible. I put them on a scale from 1 to 10. What's your mental thought process of carrying a weapon? Is it a 10 where I'm totally going to be doing this every day? Or is it a 1, I'm doing it for giggles because it makes it easier to buy a gun? And those people, I tell you, look, if you're going to get a gun because you think it's cool, walk out my door and here's your money back because I'm not training you. I don't play that game. And that's my right. I can do that.
Yeah, when I take people hunting with me, I tell them there's 3 rules. Number 3 rule is, and if they break any one of these 3 rules, they don't get to go hunting, is you don't walk around with a bullet in the barrel. You don't go to camp with a bullet in the barrel. You take the bullet out of the barrel unless you're actually fixing to hunt, if you're still hunting, or actually fixing to shoot. The number 2 rule that would stop them from going hunting is if they shoot themselves.
Yeah, that's a good rule.
But number 1 rule, and the one that's absolutely required, is they don't shoot me. So if they break any of those rules, we don't go hunting.
Who was our vice president who did that? Cheney?
Yeah, Dick Cheney. By the way, that's a pretty good movie, Vice. It's
Do they show that scene in there?
they do.
They do. I got to see that. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, man. Pointing in the wrong direction. I thought you were a bird. I thought I heard something. Okay. Hey, look, Rick, real quick. Got a couple minutes here. You were saying about the president. I got this article here that says Trump administration moves to ban bump stocks. How can the president do that? Executive
By
order?
executive order, yeah. I mean, you know, it's the president has some pretty powerful administrative probability. In fact, this movie I just talked about, Vice, Dick Cheney was responsible for expanding those laws by using certain laws on the book to describe the open-ended ability of the president to do things. So the Trump administration, bravo for them for banning bump stocks. And, you know, the reason the president did it is because it's a very popular idea now. And he likes to be popular. So.
There we go. All right. Hey, Rick, we're out of time.
I hate it when that happens.
Why don't you wrap it up with whatever you want to say, tell everybody how they get a hold of you, and give them some respect, would you?
Well, I'm available at respectforyou.com, and my job is to make sure that you get respect if you've been injured or hurt by someone else's foolishness and ignorance and rush for profits. We do a lot of work with regard to corporate greed, and people are out there all the time getting hurt, injured, and basically screwed. Harmed, I think, is a good word. They get harmed by other people not doing what they're supposed to do, like walk around with a bullet out of their gun. I've actually represented people who've been shot a few times by other stupid people, and it happens. You know, there's no such thing as an accident, though. There's always a reason for some of these traumas. There's always a reason. You just got to dig for it, and of course, that's my job. So you can contact me by coming down to the office here in Cameron, or in Temple, or in Austin, or in Conroe. And I got some really great lawyers working with me. We've been Capilano, Dodd and Krebs since 1992, and I've been practicing for 38 years. So somewhere in there I've learned a couple of things, even though I still practice at it. Someday I'll get it right.
It's good to know. Rick, it's always a pleasure. Can't thank you enough for sponsoring the program.